It's very hard for me to believe, but we are over halfway through the year 2024. So I thought instead of doing a typical monthly wrap up for June, I would jump on the mid-year check-in book tag train and take this video to talk about the year so far, what I've read, call out some of my favorites, some of my least favorites, and just kind of check in, see where we are. So let's get into it. The first question is, how many books have I read so far, and how does that compare to my current reading goal for 2024? I have read 39 books this year, and my goal is 50. Unless something crazy happens, I'm feeling pretty good about hitting that goal. I have only read 50 books in a year one time in my life so far. I think it was 2018, and I remember it being so difficult. It was literally New Year's Eve, and I was finishing my last book because I wanted to hit 50 so badly, or I was gonna be really disappointed in myself. After that year, I just remembered thinking, this is too hard. I don't ever want to read this many books again. And yet for some reason this year it's been really, really easy for me. And I think it's the types of books that I'm reading. I've kind of allowed myself to read shorter, more fun, a lot of romance, rom-com books, which has not been typical for me in the past. But that has allowed me to read a lot. We're doing good. We are halfway through July, and I am only 100 pages into my first book. So potentially we might be coming up on a bit of a reading slump, but I am ahead of my goal for 2024. So I think I'm just gonna take a break in July and maybe read 1 or 2 books and chill out, and that's okay too. The next question is, what is the genre breakdown of all of the books that you have read? So I went on Goodreads and I looked at all of the genres for the books, and I listed out the first tag on Goodreads because there's always going to be overlap in the types of genres and books. Like a mystery is also a thriller, a romance is also a fantasy. I am just breaking this down by the very first tag and listing it out that way. So I have read 1 nonfiction book. I have read 3 science fiction books, which for some reason I was surprised about. Even though that's a really small number, I don't like science fiction. So it is a feat that I have even read any science fiction so far. I've read 3 contemporary fictions. I've read 7 mysteries/thrillers, which along with science fiction is probably my least read genre of all time. I've never really enjoyed it that much, but for some reason this year it's really working for me. And I already have like other mystery books that I'm interested in reading this year. So I feel like that number is the biggest surprise for me so far. And I think it's gonna grow a lot more in the next 6 months. I've read 10 romance books, and unsurprising to anybody, I've read 15 fantasy books because that's my favorite genre. That is what I will always gravitate towards, especially since I'm a mood reader and I just want to read what I want to read, and usually that's a lot of fantasy. The next question is a star ranking breakdown. So how many stars have I given to each book? This can get a little bit more complicated than I'm going to list it out because I actually do give a lot of books point rating. So I have a 3.5 or a 4.75. And so it can get a little bit complicated to list all of that out. So once again, I'm simplifying it. I am just going by the stars that I have put on the Goodreads profile of the book and parsing it out that way. And I think at the end of the year, I'll go into more of a deep dive into the ones that I've given kind of half points to. But so far, I have 6 5-star books for the year, which feels like a relatively high number. That's about an average of 1 5-star per month. But as I was looking at it, it was interesting because I don't think I got a 5-star until March or April. So I went the first couple months reading books that just were not quite there. But I have 6 5-star books. For 4 stars, I have 14 books that are rated 4 stars. And I also have 14 books that are rated 3 stars. The difference between a 4-star and a 5-star for me, especially when those half points come into play, is just, does it consume my life afterwards? Am I thinking about it consistently after the book is finished? If I am, that's a 5-star to me. If I'm not, and it was an amazing experience, but I can walk away and not really think about it anymore, then it usually sits around the 4-star. 3-star is there are really high highs and then there are really low lows, or it's just pretty mediocre. And then I've rated 4 books as 2 stars for the year, which is the lowest rating that I will go without marking it as a DNF. For me, a 1-star book is one that I didn't end up finishing. And so far, I have read every single book and I have not DNF'd a book yet. So 0 1-stars. And then I've also read 1 book that was nonfiction, and I don't rate those. The next question is, what is the longest book you read this year? The longest book I read was House of Flame and Shadow, which I think in my circle of book friends, this is going to be typical for everybody because everybody read it at the beginning of this year, and it is 835 pages. I actually forgot that I read this book this year. It feels like I read this a decade ago. It took me 8 or 9 days to get through because it's an easy read, but it is super, super dense and there are a lot of details. So I was reading it a bit more slowly than I typically do. And so 8 or 9 days for one book is definitely a long stretch of time for me. There's that one. And then the shortest book that I read, which is the next question, was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This one was a sleeper for me. I didn't think this was gonna be the shortest book because just visually, as I'm looking at my bookshelf, it doesn't look like the shortest book, but turns out there's like 50 pages of a novella that she put in here as bonus content. So this book is actually 239 pages, which is by far the shortest book that I read. I think the next shortest book was 280 or closer to 300. Here's the difference in these guys. Not only is House of Flame and Shadow 835 pages, it is also very tall and very wide, you know? We got an inch on the top and maybe an inch on, half an inch on the side for this, but it was great, but it was long. I'm going to take a sip here. We're missing TTBD on here. The next question is a book that exceeded my expectations or the book that was the biggest surprise of the year so far. And for me, that is The Will of the Many. I love this book. This was a 5-star read for me. It was the biggest surprise because even though I knew everybody loved this book that had read it and had been talking about it, I knew that it was blowing people's minds. People were saying it was one of their favorite fantasy books of all time. Even with all of those reasons, I still thought that I wouldn't like it as much because I'm biased towards female main characters, and of course this is a male main character. I think that that is honestly natural. It's just easier for me to connect with a female versus a male, so sometimes I find that books with male leads are just harder for me to get into all the way. I also know that the setting of this and some of the details were really, really dense and minute, and I didn't think that it would be a really fast-paced read. I thought that it would be a bit of a trudge for me to get through all the way to the end. And the first 100 or 150 pages were like that. It was a lot of foundation setting, it was a lot of world building, and I was matching my own expectations for it. But once I got to about the 200-page mark, this book is so good. I think everybody needs to read it. It is so exciting. It is so well written. The magic system, the world building, and the characters are all just perfectly executed in my opinion. This one is a top dog for me, and most surprising because I maybe was a little bit cynical going into it. The next one is the most disappointing book of the year so far. This one was a bit of a toss-up for me between a couple books. And I think it comes down to expectations. Again, whereas with The Will of the Many, I was expecting not to like it as much. With the books that came to mind for this question, I was expecting to really, really like them. Because I didn't reach that level that I thought that I would, that's why I think that they're some of the most disappointing that I read. I think that it is about a tie between The Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez and People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I have a lot to say about both of these things. I'll talk about People We Meet on Vacation first. I decided that I wanted to read every single Emily Henry book this year, which I have now completed. I read Beach Read forever ago when it had first come out, And I didn't read any other Emily Henry book for a long time until January of this year when I read Book Lovers. And then because Funny Story was coming out this year, I read that. I was like, well, I'm already basically halfway done. I might as well just read the rest of the books, which were People Who Meet on Vacation and Happy Place. I loved Beach Read, and I really liked Book Lovers and Funny Story. I know how much people love this book. I've seen people that think that this is her best book, and I really liked the setting, the prompt of it. It's basically about these two best friends, Alex and Poppy, that go on a summer vacation together every single year. They've done it for like a decade. But when we pick up at the story, they are basically estranged. They haven't really spoken in 2 years because of something that happened on one of their last vacations 2 years ago. So the book takes place where Poppy tries to convince Alex to go on one last hurrah, one last summer vacation between the two of them to try and mend the relationship and figure out what's going on. I loved that prompt. I loved the idea of that, and I thought that this would be my favorite Emily Henry book, honestly. I literally went into this with the expectation that this was going to top all my other ratings. At this point, Beach Read was my favorite. The first one that I read, I had ranked 5 stars, and nothing had beat it yet. I really thought that this was gonna have it, and it didn't. It's not that it was a bad book. I still enjoyed myself, but I didn't really like the characters. I don't think that there was a compelling conflict for them to work through. I think that they were both making poor decisions that didn't make sense to me and didn't really have a justification in the actual plot. And so I was mostly confused, I was mostly annoyed, and I didn't really like the setting of this one either. One of the things that I love about Emily Henry books is that the settings she writes in are always so sweet and magical and wonderful. We're in a beach town in Michigan, we're in a lake house in Maine, and she's just really good at writing the setting and incorporating it into her book, almost like it's a separate character. And this setting was in Palm Springs, California, but the thing about it is that this vacation that Poppy and Alex are going on does not go well. So the setting sounded really terrible and grimy and gross, and I just kind of felt like uncomfortable reading it the whole time. Another thing that made me not like this book as much is that 50% of the book is past tense flashbacks. So we're with Poppy and Alex in the present tense on their current vacation, but we are also going back to all of the previous trips that they've taken, to the conception of their friendship. And because of that, the story felt so slow. It felt like this book should have been like 100 pages of things that were actually happening, and everything else was backstory that, again, I just wasn't really interested in. So it just felt really, really slow and not compelling characters and not my favorite plot line. So I rated this a 3-star, which is the lowest Emily Henry book that I've rated. It was just disappointing because I expected a lot more. The other book that it's tied with, though, is one that I read on Kindle, The Happy Ever After Playlist by Abby Jimenez. This one is the most disappointing for a different reason. I actually didn't really have many expectations going into this at all. The only other Abby Jimenez book that I had read was Yours Truly, which was wonderful, but I still didn't really know her that much as an author. I just was in the mood to read a silly romance book, and it was $4 on Kindle at the time. So I downloaded it and read it. And I put this in my Goodreads review, and I've talked about this in a different video, but this book, the first half of it was one of my favorite books I've ever read. The second half of it was one of my least favorite books I've ever read. It truly was like a 5-star and a 1-star competing against each other. And that is why I am placing it in the most disappointing category, because it set me up to really enjoy this book. I loved the beginning of it so much that I was expecting 50% in. That's when my expectations, my delayed expectations, came into play. Like, this book freaking rocks. I love it so much. And then it just absolutely tanks. I don't like how the rest of the story went. It was just a lot of miscommunication tropes. It was a lot of non-communication tropes and making assumptions about the other person without actually talking about it. So much stress, so much conflict. and not a fun time. So that one also averaged out to a 3-star rating, I think, because the beginning was so amazing. And I'm putting it in the most disappointing category because it lied to me. It lied to me. An honorable mention for this category before we move on, House of Flame and Shadow. I didn't end up picking as the most disappointing book of the year because I still did really like it. I know a lot of people were super disappointed in this, and I was too, but I think that because it's part of a trilogy and a series and a multiverse, if you will, it's hard to judge just an individual book without judging the entire thing. And I really liked this trilogy as a whole. This is the 3rd book in the Crescent City trilogy, and it wraps up those first 3 books. I think that there are plans for more Crescent City books to come out, maybe following different characters, but these first 3 books are conclusive to our main characters, Bryce and Hunt, and this is the ending of their story. The reason why it was more disappointing is because of the hype, because people were so freaking excited for this book, and because of how she left off in the 2nd book, the one before this. It just built up the expectation for this, maybe more than any book I've ever read or seen published in the circles and the people that I follow. And I think she just didn't fully deliver on what people were wanting. It was still a great book. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I think people just wanted more, and I'm with them. I did want a little bit more. It felt a little bit sloppy. It felt a little bit rushed. You know, it is what it is. Moving on. This one's just a fun one. This is just what is the prettiest cover that you've read so far. And because I do love to judge books by their covers, I picked this one, The Book of Doors. This was a really fun read for me. I actually picked this up at Barnes & Noble solely because of the cover. I had never heard of it before. I had never seen anybody talk about it before. I still haven't seen anybody talk about this book before. I just think it is gorgeous, and even the inside as well. Like, it has just this beautiful illustration on the jacket and the inside covers, and then each chapter has just these cute little doorways everywhere. So I just love it. This is one of my pretty display books for sure. Fun fact, I actually don't take very good care of my books, which I know is a no-no in this corner of the internet. I dog ear. I definitely drop a lot of books in the bath. It just means that they're read and they're well used, and it's fine. But this one I do kind of want to preserve because it's one of my favorite book covers of all time, I think. The next question is the best sequel of the year that you've read. And while I was looking at my Goodreads to refresh my memory of all the books that I've read this year, I actually haven't read a lot of sequels. I've read quite a few beginnings of trilogies or beginning books, or books that are the start of a series that their other books haven't come out yet. But I think just objectively, the best sequel that I've read this year was House of Sky and Breath. This was such a good book. Crescent City is an interesting one for me to talk about because I love Sarah J. Maas. I know I'm not alone in that. I love her other series, Throne of Glass, ACOTAR. I know that they are not, they're not literary works of art. They are over the top. They are embellished. They're cheesy. They're fun. I don't think they're supposed to take themselves too seriously, but what I really love about ACOTAR specifically, even more than Throne of Glass, is that it is a gateway to reading for people that don't really like to read or don't read that much or haven't read in a long time. It's such a great story and everybody loves the characters so much. It feels like you're watching a really good fantasy show, like the feelings that you get while you're reading it. And so many people I know on the internet, but also in real life, have read ACOTAR and they're not readers and they don't like to read, but all of a sudden they catch the bug because ACOTAR was so great for them, and then they go on to read Throne of Glass is usually next, which is, I think it's a better series than ACOTAR, but I need to think about it longer. Anyway, they read Throne of Glass, they then go read Crescent City, they start reading other fantasy books, and from there it's just a trickle effect of, there's so many wonderful things out there that they don't know about or don't care to pick up. But I really think that ACOTAR affects people and makes them want to read more, which is why I think it's really significant and a really important book series, even though it's silly and maybe not always super well written. Crescent City is Sarah J. Maas's third series or trilogy, or, separate from the other two. It's definitely my least favorite of the other two series. I read the first book. I always forget the name of this one. It's like House of Blood and House of something else. I read that book right after I finished ACOTAR. I actually read the first Crescent City before I read Throne of Glass. I liked it. I definitely didn't love it. It was like going from ACOTAR to Crescent City was so hard for my brain to wrap around because it was so complicated. The world was so intense. And I didn't rate it very highly because I didn't like it that much because I didn't really understand everything. And I read it, and House of Sky and Breath came out right as I finished the first book. And I didn't get it right away. And a couple years later, I reread the first book. And because I sort of had that foundation and I remembered a lot of things about it from my first read, it made it so much more enjoyable the second time through because I wasn't as confused about the world. I wasn't as confused about the magic system and the names and all the characters. I was actually able, for the first time, to focus on the plot, and that made me love it. And I ended up rating it a 5-star on my second read through. So I was really, really excited to go into this book, and the timing worked out great where I was finishing this book right as House of Flame and Shadow was coming out. And I knew how intense this one ended, and I knew the climax of it, and it was still just wonderful, and I had such a fun time. And I think that's maybe why House of Flame and Shadow was so disappointing for me, because the first book was a 5-star for me after the second reread, and then this one was just kind of like a continuation of it. There's no really like time breaks in between. We're just like we're running at full speed from the very beginning of the book, and it's a lot, but it was really, really, really good. So this is the best sequel that I read, kind of just because of process of elimination. It's fine though, the best sequel. Okay, this next question is a new author that you've discovered this year that you really like. As I was looking through the list of books that I've read, I'm going to give a bit of a cop-out answer. Even though I just talked about one of her books that I didn't like that much, I'm going to answer Emily Henry. And the reason why I'm including her in this, even though I had read Beach Read when it first came out years ago, I knew who Emily Henry was. I just hadn't read anything other than Beach Read. And I think I got Beach Read from a Book of the Month pick, and I hadn't seen any of her other books in Book of the Month so far, and I'd never bought one. But this year, I've read every single one of her books, and I've just loved her. I love her writing style. I love her books. The last one that I read was Happy Place. Happy Place is a really interesting one for me because where People We Meet on Vacation, I was expecting for that to be my favorite Emily Henry book. I was expecting Happy Place to be my least favorite Emily Henry book, and it is just because of the plot. I realized about myself that I prefer books where the main relationship, they haven't met yet, or they don't really know each other that well. So what you're reading is them getting to know each other and them falling in love. This book is about Harriet and Wynne, who already know each other. They already fell in love. They were already engaged, and then they've already broken up. And that's where we pick up the book of them as a broken up couple, potentially falling back in love. Spoiler alert. This book follows Harriet and Wynne and a group of friends as they go on vacation to Maine together. Because of one reason or another, Harriet and Wynne have not told their friends that they are broken up yet. And they basically have to fake that they're still engaged while on this vacation. They're forced to work through their problems that they hadn't really been able to work through before. That just didn't sound appealing to me when I read the back of the cover. I thought that it would not because of quality or not because of the writing style, but just personally, I just didn't think that I would like that as much. But oh my gosh, this book is so good. This book is, plot twist, it is my favorite Emily Henry book now. It's so good. The writing is beautiful. It feels so much more emotional than her other books. The depth of the characters and what they're going through, even the side characters, the ensemble in this book is amazing, and it really feels realistic, and it feels real. This hardly feels like a romance novel to me. Like, don't be fooled by this beautiful pink, happy, sunshiny cover. This is an emotional book, and there were a lot of themes in it that were difficult to read about and sad to read about, but I just think that Emily Henry handles it so well, and I have a lot of respect for her after reading this book too. I could talk about it for a long time, and I won't because we're getting long, but this is such a good book. That wasn't even the question. The question was an author that was your favorite of the year, and so I'm saying Emily Henry, but I just took it as an opportunity to talk about Happy Place and to plug it and to tell you that you should definitely read it. So, the next question is a book that made you cry. I cry in a lot of books. I cry in most movies and TV shows that I watch. I definitely cry in books, so it's not difficult to make me cry, but I have been reading a lot of cute rom-com romance books this year, or mystery thriller books this year. I haven't really read a ton of emotional books, but my grandmother asked me to tell you she's sorry by Friedrich Bachmann. This book made me cry. This book was like not, my eyes aren't welling up. It's like you start and suddenly you get the pain in your throat because you're trying so hard. You get like a full body flush and you start to get red, and your skin is blotchy now, and your throat hurts because you're trying to hold back a sob, and then all of a sudden your eyes get so watery that you can't see through them anymore, and then just the big alligator tears just start doing this, and then you're reading and then you're like and then you're sniffing, and then your husband looks up from his laptop and is like, what's going on? That happened to me during this book. So, a great book though, definitely recommend. All right, let's get into the exciting things now. Oh, hey. Hello. Maybe you need a video? Okay, let's get into the real reason that everybody watches these book tags, and it's to hear about my least favorite book of the year so far and my most favorite book of the year so far. We'll start with least so that we can end this video on a positive note. My least favorite book of the year was Severance by Ling Ma, and it's just because it was really depressing. It was a really dark setting and atmosphere. It's post-apocalyptic. I don't like post-apocalyptic books. They stress me out. Thinking about the end of the world stresses me out. So I don't like it. And the only reason that I picked up this book is because the TBR jar forced me to, and it's been on my shelf for 6 years. It was just staring at me and making me really guilty that I still haven't read it. So I finally read it. It's not very long, and the writing is not very difficult to get through. So I did read it pretty fast. I also just wanted to finish it so badly so I could be done with it and read something else that I really read it fast. It's about a pandemic that basically turns people into zombies, and then people start working from home, and our main character, Candace, is pregnant and trying to figure out how to survive in this world where there are not a lot of people, and then she accidentally enters a cult. And the ending, nothing happened in the ending. The ending was just inconclusive. And so I rated this a 2-star. We won't talk anymore about that. We'll talk about my most favorite book of the year, which is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I didn't think that I would be putting a romance book as my favorite book of the year so far, but actually I had to really think about this one because it was almost Happy Place. And then I had a crisis of identity because my 2 favorite books of the year were both romance books, which is weird, but we're fine. We like what we like and we read what we want to read, and here we are. Just for the Summer. I didn't think that I would like this book as much because I had read Yours Truly, and I did really like that one. I wasn't crazy about the story, but I did really like it. And then the book that I read before this was the Happy Ever After playlist, which was one of my most disappointing books of the year and one of the most frustrating books that I've probably ever read. So this one could have gone either way. I didn't really know what to expect. Oh, it was so good. It was so well written. There's some really tough themes in here. I honestly would give a little bit of a content warning if you are picking this book up, just because it could trigger some stuff with some family dynamics, but I think it was all handled really well, really respectfully. The characters were so deep, and their arcs, their development, it felt so satisfying because you know what they're going through, you know the problems that they're dealing with, and then you see them react out of those problems, and it's tough because you want them to have a happy ending, but it makes sense that they're reacting this way because it's just kind of what they're used to. But the development, the arc, the growth that they experience, and then the coming back together at the end of the book for a happy ending. It just was so wonderful and enjoyable. I read this book in a single day because I could not stop reading it. It was great. 5 stars easily. And that is that. That is my mid-year check-in. We've had some highs, we've had some lows. We've had some fun times and some sad times, but there's still 6 months to go and only 11 books until I reach my reading goal. So we'll keep checking in and see you next time.